Opening. There are men whose lives read like legend, yet every word of it is history. A boy who never bowed to an idol. A young man who slept in the bed of the most wanted man in Arabia, knowing he might be killed before dawn. A warrior whose sword became a symbol of courage across centuries. A scholar so deep in knowledge that it was said, "I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is its gate." This is the story of Ali ibn Abi Talib, cousin, son-in-law, and devoted companion of the Prophet Muhammad, and the fourth Caliph of Islam. Birth. Ali was born inside the Kaaba itself, in the sacred city of Mecca, into the noble tribe of Banu Hashim, the same clan as the Prophet. His father was Abu Talib, the Prophet's uncle and guardian, a respected chief of Mecca who, though he never openly embraced Islam, protected his nephew fiercely against the hostility of the Quraysh. His mother, Fatima bint Asad, was known for her gentleness and devotion. Later in life, she herself accepted Islam and was deeply loved by the Prophet. Because Abu Talib's household faced financial strain, and Mecca itself was going through a period of famine, the Prophet, out of love and gratitude for the man who had raised him after the death of his own father, proposed to his uncle Abbas that between them they would each take in one of Abu Talib's sons to ease the family's burden. Abbas took Jafar, and the Prophet took Ali. So Ali grew up not merely as a cousin, but almost as a son, raised in the household of the Prophet from early childhood, under the care of the Prophet himself and his wife Khadijah. Living under that roof gave Ali a vantage point no one else in Mecca had. He watched the Prophet pray quietly in the hills outside the city, long before the message of Islam was ever announced publicly, and he grew curious about what he was seeing. When he finally asked, the Prophet explained that this was the religion of the one true God, and invited him to join in worship. And so, when the call finally came, Ali did not hesitate. Historians differ on his exact age. Some accounts say he was around 10 years old. Others place him a little older. But nearly all agree on this central point. Ali was the first young person, and among the very first souls in all of history, to accept Islam. He had never once, in his entire life, worshipped an idol. While his elders in the tribe debated, hesitated, and weighed the cost of this new faith against their standing in Meccan society, a child in that household simply believed without needing to be persuaded twice. Years later, when the Prophet was commanded to announce his message publicly for the first time, he gathered his close relatives and asked which of them would stand beside him in this mission. In a room full of older, more established men, it was young Ali who rose and pledged his support, a moment that later generations would remember as an early sign of the role he would go on to play throughout the Prophet's life. The night of Hijrah years passed, and the message of Islam grew, and so did the fury of the Quraysh. By the time the Prophet prepared to migrate from Mecca to Medina, the leaders of Quraysh had hatched a plan. Young men from every tribe would strike him together in the night, so that his blood would be spread among all clans, and no single family could seek revenge. The Prophet needed someone to sleep in his bed that night, to buy time for his own escape, someone whose life he trusted completely. He turned to Ali. Ali agreed without a moment's hesitation, though he understood exactly what it might cost him. That night, while armed men surrounded the house waiting to strike, Ali lay down under the Prophet's blanket. When morning came, and the attackers finally burst in, they found not the Prophet, but a young man rising calmly to greet them. Their plan had failed, and their prey had already slipped away toward Medina. Before Ali himself left the city, the Prophet entrusted him with one more task: to return the belongings and trusts that people, even those hostile to him, had left in his care, a final testament to the Prophet's own honesty even amid persecution. Only after settling these debts did Ali make his own journey to Medina, arriving to reunite with the Prophet and the growing community of believers. The Battle of Badr in Medina, the small Muslim community grew, but so did the threat from Mecca. In the second year after the Hijrah, the two sides met at the wells of Badr, a heavily outnumbered Muslim force against the seasoned army of Quraysh. It was here that Ali's reputation as a warrior began to take shape. Arabian custom of the time called for battles to open with single combat between champions from each side before the main armies clashed. 3 Meccan warriors stepped forward and called for equally matched opponents. In response, 3 Muslim fighters advanced: Hamza, the Prophet's uncle, Ubaidah ibn al-Harith, and Ali, still a young man in his 20s. Each faced off against his opponent, and by the end of these duels, 2 of the 3 Meccan champions lay dead. Ali is recorded as having decisively defeated his own opponent, while the third exchange left Ubaidah gravely wounded, avenged moments later by his companions. That early exchange shattered the confidence of the Meccan ranks before the general fighting had even begun, and it set the tone for what followed. Though heavily outnumbered, the Muslim army pressed forward with a resolve their opponents had not expected, and by the day's end, Quraysh's larger, better-equipped force had been routed. Badr became the first great and decisive victory of the young Muslim state in Medina, a turning point that proved the small community could stand and win against far greater numbers. And within it, Ali's name was already being spoken of with respect on both sides of the field, a young man whose blade had helped open the battle in the Muslims' favor. Marriage to Fatima. Amid the trials of those early Medinan years came one of the most tender chapters of Ali's life: his marriage to Fatima, the beloved daughter of the Prophet. Ali was not a wealthy man. By his own account, he owned little more than his armor, a sword, and a camel. When he approached the Prophet to ask for Fatima's hand, he had almost nothing to offer as a dowry. The Prophet suggested he sell his shield, and with those modest proceeds, the marriage was arranged. It was a simple wedding by any standard of wealth, but one of the most significant in Islamic history. For from this marriage came Hassan and Hussein, whom the Prophet loved dearly, and whose descendants are honored across the Muslim world to this day. Ali and Fatima's household, by every account, was one of simplicity, hardship at times, and deep mutual devotion. The Battle of Uhud. A year after Badr, the tide turned. At the Battle of Uhud, a mistaken positioning by a group of archers allowed the Meccan cavalry to outflank the Muslim army, and the battle nearly turned into disaster. In the chaos, rumors even spread that the Prophet himself had been killed. Ali remained close to him throughout, fighting to protect him as the ranks scattered, absorbing blows meant for the Prophet, and standing firm even as others fled in the confusion. It was a day of loss and grief for the Muslims, but also a day that further cemented Ali's role as one of the Prophet's most trusted and courageous defenders. At the birth of Hassan, in the years that followed, joy returned to the household of Ali and Fatima with the birth of their first son, Hassan. The Prophet adored his grandson, often carrying him, playing with him, and famously declaring his love for Hassan and his brother openly before the community. Hassan would grow up to briefly hold leadership of the Muslim community after his father, known for his wisdom and his eventual decision to pursue peace over prolonged conflict. The Battle of the Trench, Khandak. When a massive coalition of tribes, Quraysh and their allies, numbering in the thousands, marched on Medina intending to finally crush the Muslim community, the Muslims, on the advice of the Persian companion Salman, dug a deep trench around the exposed side of the city. It was a tactic almost unheard of in Arabian warfare, and it stunned the besieging armies, who found themselves unable to charge the city as they had planned. What followed was less a battle than a prolonged, tense siege, with occasional skirmishes across the trench and mounting pressure on the exhausted defenders inside. During the siege, a renowned warrior named Amr ibn Abd Wud, considered one of the most feared fighters in all of Arabia, managed to find a narrow crossing point and leapt over the trench with a handful of companions, riding straight up to the Muslim lines and challenging anyone to single combat. For a tense and heavy moment, no one stepped forward against this legendary fighter, whose reputation alone had unsettled the defenders, until Ali volunteered. The Prophet is reported to have said that, at that moment, all of faith stood on one side of the field, and all of disbelief on the other. Their duel became one of the most retold encounters in Islamic history, fought largely in silence, and with each blow drawing gasps from those watching along the trench. Ali ultimately defeated him, and this single combat is remembered as a turning point that shook the confidence of the entire besieging coalition. Soon after, a fierce windstorm scattered the enemy camp, supplies dwindled, and the alliance between the tribes began to fracture. The siege collapsed, and Medina was saved, the birth of Hussein. Not long after, a second son was born to Ali and Fatima, Hussein. Like his brother, Hussein was deeply cherished by the Prophet, who spoke often of his love for both boys and their high status. Ali could not have known then the tragic fate that would befall Hussein decades later at Karbala, a story that belongs to a different chapter of history. In the 6th year after the Hijrah, the Prophet set out for Mecca not for war, but for pilgrimage. The Quraysh, wary and suspicious, blocked his path at a place called Hudaybiyah, and after tense negotiations, a treaty was drawn up, one that, on the surface, seemed to favor the Meccans with unfavorable terms for the Muslims. Ali played a direct and personal role here. He served as the scribe of the treaty, writing down its terms by the Prophet's dictation. When the Meccan negotiator objected to the phrase, Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, insisting they did not recognize this title, the Prophet asked Ali to strike it out. Ali, out of love and reverence, could not bring himself to erase the words with his own hand, so the Prophet gently took the document and struck it out himself. It was a small moment, but one that captured Ali's devotion. Though the treaty seemed a setback at the time, it would soon open the door to years of relative peace and the rapid spread of Islam. A simple way of life. Despite his closeness to the Prophet, his battlefield fame, and later his position as a ruler over a vast territory, Ali was known throughout his life for extraordinary simplicity. He mended his own clothes, ate plain food, and lived without the luxuries available to men of far lower standing. He worked with his own hands, at times laboring in the palm groves of Medina, to earn what he needed. Companions often described him as a man untouched by the pull of worldly comfort, his focus fixed instead on justice, knowledge, and worship. This lifestyle became, for later generations, a model of humility in leadership. The Battle of Khaybar. Perhaps the most famous single episode of Ali's military life came at the Jewish stronghold of Khaybar. The fortress had resisted repeated assaults, and previous commanders sent by the Prophet had failed to take it. The Prophet then declared that on the following day, he would hand the banner to a man who loved Allah and his messenger, and whom Allah and his messenger loved in return. A man through whose hands Allah would grant victory, and who would not turn back in retreat. That night the companions could talk of little else, each one hoping and wondering who this would be. The next morning, the Prophet asked where Ali was. He was told that Ali was suffering badly from an eye ailment, unable to see clearly. The Prophet sent for him anyway, applied his own blessed saliva to Ali's eyes, and by all accounts, the discomfort and inflammation vanished instantly, as though he had never been afflicted at all. Banner in hand, Ali led the charge toward the fortress gates. In the fighting that followed, he is remembered in numerous accounts for a particular feat of strength. At one point during the assault, tradition holds that he wrenched loose one of the heavy iron gates of the fortress and used it as a shield, a detail that has been retold across generations as a symbol of almost superhuman effort born of faith and determination. Whatever the precise details, the outcome was clear. Khaybar, which had withstood assault after assault, finally fell. To this day, the story of Khaybar is told as the defining picture of Ali's bravery and his singular trusted bond with the Prophet. The conquest of Mecca. 2 years after Hudaybiyah, the treaty was broken by the Meccans, and the Prophet marched on the city with an overwhelming force, not for vengeance, but ultimately for a peaceful, near-bloodless conquest. Ali marched among the leading companions that day. Inside the Kaaba, the very house where he himself had been born, idols that had stood for generations were removed and destroyed. It was, in many ways, a full circle moment. The boy born inside those sacred walls now stood as a man helping to cleanse them of everything that had once stood against the message he had believed in since childhood. The event of Mubahala. Not long after, a delegation of Christians from Najran came to debate the nature of Prophet Isa, Jesus, peace be upon him, with the Prophet. When words reached an impasse, a form of mutual invocation, known as Mubahala, was proposed, in which both sides would call upon God to curse whichever party was lying. For this solemn moment, the Prophet brought forward his closest family, his daughter Fatima, his grandsons Hassan and Hussein, and Ali himself. The Christian delegation, upon seeing the sincerity and the weight of the family the Prophet was willing to bring forward, ultimately withdrew from the confrontation, and instead agreed to a peaceful settlement. The event remains significant in Islamic tradition as a testament to the closeness of Ali and his family to the Prophet. The mission to Yemen. As Islam spread across the Arabian Peninsula, the Prophet sent Ali to Yemen, both as a military leader and as a judge, to resolve disputes and teach the people the new faith. Ali himself later recalled feeling uncertain about his ability to judge fairly among people with so little prior experience in such matters, but the Prophet reassured him and prayed that Allah would guide his heart and steady his tongue. Ali went on to earn a reputation as an exceptionally wise and fair judge, a reputation that would follow him for the rest of his life and become one of the foundations of his later role as Khalifa. Through his efforts, large numbers of people in Yemen accepted Islam peacefully. On the journey back from his final pilgrimage, the Prophet paused at a place called Ghadir Qum and addressed the gathered pilgrims. In his sermon, he spoke of holding fast to the Quran and to his family, and he made statements praising Ali's close bond with him. This moment, Ghadir Qum, holds deep significance across the Muslim world, though its meaning has been understood differently by different communities over the centuries. A topic that later became central to broader historical and theological discussions about leadership after the Prophet. What is agreed upon by historians of every perspective is that the event took place, and that it reflected the profound closeness between the Prophet and his cousin and son-in-law. Not long after returning from that final pilgrimage, the Prophet fell ill in Medina. Ali was among those closest to him in his final days, present in the house during those difficult hours. When the Prophet passed away, it was Ali, alongside a few other close family members, who took on the sacred task of washing and preparing his body for burial. One last act of devotion from the boy he had raised, the young man who had slept in his bed to protect him, the warrior who had fought at his side, and the son-in-law who had married his beloved daughter. The passing of the Prophet marked the end of the era of revelation, but it was only the beginning of a new chapter for Ali, one that would eventually lead him, years later, through the caliphates of Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, to become the fourth Caliph of Islam himself, inheriting a community facing new and difficult challenges of its own. From a childhood spent in the shadow of the Kaaba to the battlefields of Badr, Uhud, and Khaybar, from the quiet devotion of a simple household to the solemn responsibility of judgment and leadership, the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib is remembered as one of unwavering faith, courage, and closeness to the Prophet. It is a story still told, still studied, and still cherished, more than 14 centuries later. Sources drawn on for this script include classical and modern biographical works, such as Tariq Tabari, Tariq ibn Kathir, Ibn Athir, Ibn Khaldun, Ar-Rahiq al-Makhtum, and modern biographies of Ali ibn Abi Talib. This script presents the widely agreed historical narrative. Some events, particularly Ghadir Qum and the succession after the Prophet, are understood differently across Islamic traditions, and viewers are encouraged to consult scholars of their own tradition for deeper theological interpretation.